The twins couldn't scream. Vanessa Westfield had learned to live with that silence, the absence of tantrums, of laughter, of any sound that proved her 4-year-olds were more than beautiful statues trapped in wheelchairs. Their diagnosis had 17 syllables the specialists loved to repeat. Severe spastic cerebral palsy with global developmental delay. She'd memorized every syllable while writing checks that never changed anything. But on that Tuesday evening, when her nanny quit without notice and Vanessa had no choice but to bring the twins down to her office building's lobby while she finished a crisis meeting upstairs, she returned to find something impossible. The night janitor, a man with calloused hands and silver threading through dark hair, was crouched beside her daughter's wheelchair, and the child's fingers were moving. Not trembling, not spasming. Moving with intention, reaching toward his palm like she understood what reaching meant. Vanessa stood frozen by the elevator, briefcase slipping from her grip. This man wasn't supposed to touch her children. Yet in the empty marble hall, under fluorescent lights that made everything look clinical and cold, she watched him do something that $60,000 worth of specialists had sworn was impossible. What she didn't know was that this janitor had a secret that would shatter everything she thought she understood about saving her children. Russell Hayes had been invisible for 3 years. That's how long he'd worked the night shift at Westfield Tower, mopping floors that cost more per square foot than most people's cars. He preferred it that way. The building after midnight belonged to shadows and fluorescent hum, to the careful routine he'd built after everything else had crumbled. He was 52 years old and looked older, the kind of aging that came from loss rather than time. His hands told their own story, scarred knuckles from another life, calluses from the mop handle, a thin white line across his left palm from the day he'd shattered a glass picture frame and hadn't cared about the bleeding. His daughter, Lily, he'd kept her name when he adopted her 2 years ago, was 8 years old and wise beyond measure. She had cerebral palsy too, though hers manifested differently. She could walk with braces and determination, could speak in careful sentences that required patience from listeners. Russell had spent 4 years learning how to be that listener, how to celebrate victories measured in millimeters of progress. The Westfield twins appeared in the lobby on a Tuesday in late October, and Russell noticed immediately because children weren't supposed to be there at 7 p.m., especially not children in medical-grade wheelchairs. Vanessa Westfield, he knew her by sight, though she'd never once looked at him directly, was on her phone, her voice sharp with controlled frustration as she positioned the wheelchairs near the security desk. The guards looked uncomfortable in the way people do when children with disabilities enter their space. Russell continued mopping, but his attention had shifted. The little girl in the left wheelchair had dark curls escaping from a velvet headband, her hands resting in her lap with fingers curled inward. Her brother mirrored her stillness, his eyes tracking his mother's pacing with an alertness that contradicted his body's rigidity. They were perhaps 4 years old, their faces holding that particular beauty that comes from being untouched by expression. Vanessa's phone conversation ended with the decisive tap of someone who won arguments through will alone. She crouched beside her daughter, adjusted the child's hands with practiced efficiency, then stood and addressed the security guards without warmth. "I need 30 minutes. The nanny quit today without notice. They'll be fine here. Don't touch them. Don't move them." She disappeared into the executive elevator, leaving behind uncomfortable silence. Russell made a decision that would change everything. He walked toward the wheelchairs with unhurried pace, giving them time to notice him. He knelt slowly until his face was level with the little girl's. "Hey there," he said quietly. Not baby talk, just a greeting between equals. "I'm Russell. I clean this building at night." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small rubber ball, bright red with a rainbow swirl. He'd bought it that morning for Lily. Russell placed the ball in his palm and held it where the little girl could see. Then he did something he'd learned through 4 years with his daughter. He waited. The girl's fingers twitched, not involuntary spasm, but something trying. Russell kept his hand steady, kept his breathing even. After 45 seconds that felt longer, the child's right index finger extended slightly, trembled, then moved with clear intention toward the ball in his palm. That's when he heard the sharp intake of breath behind him and turned to see Vanessa Westfield standing by the elevator, her briefcase on the floor, her face drained of color. Russell didn't move. The little girl's finger touched the rubber surface with pressure so light it barely made contact. But it was contact, deliberate and unmistakable. Vanessa walked forward slowly, and when she reached them, her voice came out smaller than a woman of her stature should sound. "How did you do that?" Russell stood. "I didn't do anything. Your daughter did it. I just gave her time and a reason." Vanessa stared at him as if he'd spoken a foreign language. "That's impossible," she said, but without conviction. "It's not impossible," Russell replied. "It's just slow. So slow most people don't have the patience to wait for it." He should have left it there, but something in her face stopped him, a desperation he recognized. "I have a daughter. She's 8. She has CP too, different type, but I've learned some things. About waiting. About what's possible when you stop measuring progress in normal increments." Vanessa's professional mask cracked slightly. "They told me my children would never have purposeful movement, never speak, never recognize me. I've had 17 specialists say the same thing, and I fired everyone because I couldn't accept it." "They were wrong," Russell said with quiet certainty. "Not about the severity, not about the challenges, but about possibility. There's always possibility, Mrs. Westfield. Your children are remarkable. The question isn't what they can't do. The question is whether the people around them are willing to wait long enough to see what they can." She didn't leave. Instead, she crouched beside her son's wheelchair and with unexpected gentleness placed her hand where he could see it and waited. Nothing happened. 60 seconds passed. 90. Her son's eyes tracked to her face, held there with intensity that suggested understanding, but his hands remained still. "It doesn't happen every time," Russell said. "Some days my daughter can walk without her braces. Some days she needs me to carry her. Progress isn't linear. You measure the tide over months, not minutes." Vanessa stood, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't know you. I don't know anything about you. Why should I trust that what you're saying is real?" "You shouldn't," Russell said simply. "Trust takes time, too. But here's what I know. You saw your daughter move her finger with intention for what I'm guessing is the first time in her life. So you can call that coincidence, or you can call it a starting point. I work midnight to 6, 5 nights a week. Your children are welcome during any of those hours if you want to see what patience looks like. No charge, no expectations, just time and possibility." He left before she could respond, knowing that his past might eventually surface and destroy whatever fragile trust he was trying to build. But when he'd seen that little girl's finger move, he couldn't walk away, because 3 years ago, someone had refused to walk away from Lily, and that refusal had saved both their lives. He didn't expect Vanessa to take him up on his offer, so when he arrived Wednesday night and found her waiting with both twins, he stopped short. "I called building management," Vanessa said without preamble. "They confirmed you've worked here 3 years without incident. I also had my assistant run a background check. You're clean. No criminal record, no red flags, except a conspicuous employment gap before 3 years ago." Russell set down his bucket carefully. "I can explain the employment gap if you need me to." "I don't," Vanessa said quickly. "Not yet. Right now I need to know if what happened yesterday was real." Russell approached the wheelchairs. "What are their names?" "Isabel," Vanessa said, touching her daughter's shoulder. And Sebastian. Russell knelt in front of Isabel, pulled out the red ball. Hello again, Isabel. Remember this? He waited for her eyes to focus. Yesterday you touched it. Today we're not going to try to touch it. We're just going to look at it. No pressure, no goals. Just you and me and a silly rubber ball. He could feel Vanessa's confusion, her unasked question about what progress could come from not trying. But Russell had learned this through hundreds of failed attempts with Lily. You couldn't build movement without first building attention. You made observation itself the achievement. Isabel watched the ball, her breathing changing slightly. She was concentrating, preparing for effort, even though he'd said none was required. Easy, he murmured. Just looking. You're already doing exactly what I asked. He turned to Sebastian with a different ball, this one textured with raised bumps. He held it close to Sebastian's hand, not touching. This feels weird. If you want to feel it, it's right here. If you don't, that's okay too. Sebastian's reaction was immediate, shoulders tensing, body bracing. Russell pulled the ball back 6 inches. Noted. You don't like surprises near your hands. That's good information. He shifted so Sebastian could see his face. How about this? I'm going to touch my own hand with this ball, and you can watch. Russell demonstrated the gentle touch on his own palm. Sebastian watched with quiet evaluation. After 90 seconds, Sebastian's left hand, which had been curled tightly against his body, relaxed fractionally. Not movement toward the ball, just release of tension. Russell grinned. There it is. That's huge, Sebastian. You just told me you're willing to consider something new. That's trust starting to build. Vanessa stepped forward. That's it? 5 minutes of looking at balls? Russell stood. Mrs. Westfield, your children have spent 4 years having things done to them. What I'm doing is asking them to be active participants in their own development. It looks like nothing, because we've been conditioned to believe progress has to hurt. But the most powerful progress happens when someone feels safe enough to try. She wanted to argue. He could see it in her tightened jaw. But she'd also seen her daughter's finger move with intention, and that had cracked her certainty. How long before I see real progress? Before they can walk or speak or... She stopped. I don't know, Russell said honestly. Maybe months, maybe years, maybe some things will always be out of reach. But if you give me time without expectations and without deadlines, I'll help them become the fullest version of themselves their bodies and brains will allow. Same time tomorrow, if you want to continue. Vanessa crouched between the wheelchairs, searching her children's faces. When she stood, her expression had resolved. Tomorrow night, but I want to understand what you're doing. The methodology, the reasoning. Russell nodded. Fair enough. Though I should warn you, the methodology is mostly intuition learned through trial and error. The reasoning changes based on what the children tell me, and the expected outcomes are whatever they decide to show me. This isn't a clinical protocol. It's a relationship. That word unsettled her more than anything else. She gathered her things and left without another word. But she came back the next night, and the night after that. Within 2 weeks, Russell's midnight shift had reorganized around the hour when Vanessa would arrive with Isabel and Sebastian, when the lobby became less a corporate space and more a laboratory of tiny miracles. By the 3rd week, Sebastian had touched the textured ball. By the 4th week, Isabel could maintain her finger extension for 5 full seconds. By the 6th week, Sebastian made a sound. Not a word, but a purposeful vocalization directed at Russell when he'd started to pack up early. Vanessa had been on a phone call, her back turned. Russell had frozen. Did you just tell me not to leave? Sebastian's eyes held his with absolute communication. Message received. The changes were small, but undeniable. Isabel's muscle tone had improved fractionally. Her neck held her head with slightly more control. Sebastian's breathing had deepened, as if his body was learning it could relax. And both children watched Russell with recognition that went beyond familiarity, with anticipation that his presence meant something good would happen. But Vanessa was changing too. She'd stopped taking phone calls during sessions. She'd started arriving early and staying late. She'd begun asking different questions, not when will they walk, but why does Isabel tilt her head when she's concentrating? And what does it mean that Sebastian prefers his left side? She was learning to read her children the way Russell had learned to read Lily. On a Thursday night in early December, Russell arrived to find Vanessa waiting with someone else, a woman in expensive business casual carrying a leather portfolio. Russell's stomach dropped. The woman extended her hand. "I'm Patricia Hendricks, pediatric occupational therapist. Mrs. Westfield asked me to observe your work." Russell shook her hand. "Russell Hayes. I'm not a therapist. I should be clear about that up front." Patricia's smile was professional. "Mrs. Westfield mentioned you have unconventional approaches. I'm here to assess whether they're beneficial or potentially harmful." Russell turned to Vanessa, who looked uncomfortable. "I needed professional validation that what we're doing isn't making things worse." "Fair," Russell said, though something in his chest had gone cold. Professional validation meant questions about his background. "What do you want me to do?" "What you normally do," Patricia said, settling with her portfolio. "Pretend I'm not here." Russell knelt in front of Isabel. "Hey, Isabel. We have a visitor tonight. That's okay." There was tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. He softened his voice. "I know. It's different, but you're safe. We're just going to do what we always do." He held the ball, waited for her attention. "I'm going to move the ball in a circle, very slowly. I want you to track it with your eyes. Just your eyes. Ready?" He began moving the ball in a wide circular pattern. Isabel's eyes followed smoothly, precisely. After 3 circles, Russell stopped. "Beautiful work. Now, when the ball gets to the top of the circle, I want you to blink once if you can, not because you have to, but because you choose to." Patricia shifted in her chair. Russell ignored her and focused on Isabel. He began the motion again, and when the ball reached its apex, Isabel blinked. Once. Deliberately. Russell's grin could have lit the lobby. "That's communication, Isabel. That's you telling me you understand. That's massive." He turned to Sebastian with the wooden block. "This block is going to rest near your hand, not touching. I want you to tell me, any way you want, if you like it there or if you want it moved. Your choice." He positioned the block 3 inches from Sebastian's right hand and waited. At 90 seconds, Sebastian's hand moved away from the block. A clear, deliberate withdrawal. Russell nodded. "Got it. You're saying not today. Thank you for telling me." He removed the block immediately. Patricia leaned forward. "That's it? He moved away and you're counting that as success?" Russell stood. "Ms. Hendricks, 3 months ago, Sebastian's default response was to increase muscle rigidity until the threat was removed. Tonight, he actively communicated a boundary. That's transformation from passive recipient to active participant. If you can't see the significance, then we're measuring progress with incompatible tools." The silence was sharp. Patricia closed her portfolio. "Mr. Hayes, I'd like to ask about your background. The approaches you're using, the emphasis on agency rather than physical gains, those aren't typical for someone without formal training. Where did you learn these methods?" And there it was. The question Russell had dreaded. He could lie, could deflect. But he looked at Isabel's face, at Sebastian's guarded eyes, at Vanessa's desperate hope, and found he couldn't. "I learned them," Russell said quietly. during my 15 years as a pediatric physical therapist, specializing in neurological disorders. Before I quit my practice, lost my license voluntarily, and became invisible. Vanessa's face drained of color. Patricia's expression shifted to alert. Russell continued, the words coming faster. My wife and I had a son, Theo. He was 6 when the car accident happened. Brain injury. Severe. I devoted everything to proving the doctors wrong. It worked. He started improving, started communicating again. Then he died anyway. Seizure in his sleep 18 months after the accident. My wife couldn't survive losing him twice. I found her 3 months later. Pills. Vanessa's hand went to her mouth. I walked away from my practice because I couldn't be in that world anymore. I let my license lapse, moved cities, took the first job requiring nothing from me. Then 2 years ago, I met Lily at a hospital. She had CP, had been through foster care, had nobody willing to take on a disabled 8-year-old. I fostered her, then adopted her. And everything I'd learned during Theo's recovery, I used with her. Not to fix her, just to help her become whoever she was capable of being. He met Vanessa's eyes. I should have told you from the beginning, but I was afraid you'd see my history as either a qualification with expectations I couldn't meet, or proof that I failed when it mattered most. I wanted to help Isabel and Sebastian so badly, I convinced myself the lie was justified. I'll understand if you don't want me near your children anymore. He turned toward the service corridor, his throat tight. But Vanessa's voice stopped him. Wait! It was commanding. Russell stopped. He heard her heels clicking, felt her presence beside him. You had a son. You lost him. And instead of letting that destroy you completely, you learned how to save someone else's child. That's not failure, Russell. That's the opposite of failure. He turned slowly, found her looking at him with raw empathy. The license, Patricia said thoughtfully. You let it lapse voluntarily. That means there was no malpractice, no finding against you. Russell nodded. I just walked away. Couldn't be Dr. Hayes anymore. Patricia stood. Mrs. Westfield, I'll send my full assessment in writing, but I can tell you now, what Mr. Hayes is doing is not only safe, it's extraordinary. The emphasis on agency, on building trust before attempting physical goals, those are cutting-edge approaches most therapists struggle to implement. If he was still practicing, he'd be someone I'd refer my most complex cases to. She paused at the exit. For what it's worth, Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry for your losses, but I'm not sorry you found your way to these children. She left. Russell looked at Vanessa. I'll resign if that's what you need. No, Vanessa said firmly. You'll continue exactly what you've been doing, but you'll let me pay you properly. Consultant rates for a specialist with 15 years of experience. Russell shook his head. I can't accept that. I'm not licensed anymore. Vanessa's expression shifted into something sharp. You're not providing medical care. You're providing enrichment activities during your personal time, completely legal, and completely within my right to compensate however I see fit. Unless you have a principled objection to accepting money for valuable work. He didn't. The truth was he'd been struggling to cover Lily's medical expenses on a janitor's salary. Okay, he said quietly, but I need you to understand something. What happened with Theo, the progress he made, it didn't save him. Sometimes you do everything right and biology wins anyway. I can help your children develop whatever capabilities their bodies and brains will support, but I can't promise specific outcomes. If that's not enough, we should stop now. Vanessa looked at her children. When she looked back, her eyes were wet, but her voice steady. When Isabel and Sebastian were born, doctors told me to prepare for the worst. When they survived, I was told they'd never have quality of life. When they turned 1 and couldn't hold their heads up, I was told institutional care might be kindest. I've spent 4 years being told to lower my expectations, to accept limitations, to grieve the children I thought I'd have. She crouched between the wheelchairs, placed a hand on each child's shoulder. You're the first person who's talked about them as if they're already enough, as if the goal isn't to fix them, but to reveal them. That's not just enough, Russell. That's everything. The next 3 months transformed all of them. Vanessa arranged for Russell to work with the twins 3 evenings a week in a former conference space on the 15th floor that became their makeshift therapy studio. Lily started joining them twice a week. She'd been nervous at first, self-conscious about her braces around these younger children who couldn't speak. But Isabel and Sebastian responded to her with immediate fascination, their eyes tracking her movements with intensity. And Lily, who'd been so isolated by her disability, blossomed under their attention. She'd narrate what Russell was doing, her voice patient. See, Isabel? Dad's going to help you roll. It might feel weird, but it won't hurt. I had to learn this too. The breakthroughs came in waves. In January, Isabel rolled from her back to her side independently, just once, unrepeated for 2 weeks, but undeniable. In February, Sebastian vocalized his first clear vowel sound, an ah that made Vanessa cry so hard she had to leave the room. In March, Isabel held a spoon for 6 seconds, her grip weak but purposeful. But progress wasn't linear. Some sessions ended with tears, Isabel frustrated, Sebastian overwhelmed, Lily exhausted. Some sessions ended with regression, as if their neurological systems needed to consolidate before attempting new skills. Russell learned to read Vanessa's moods. On good days, she'd arrive with coffee for both of them and participate actively. On hard days, she'd arrive late with her jaw tight and phone vibrating constantly, and she'd watch from the corner like someone at a funeral for hopes she'd tried not to have. Russell gave her space on those days, understanding that hope was exhausting. They were becoming something Russell hadn't expected, not quite friends, but something adjacent. Colleagues, co-conspirators in refusing to accept that disabled children were tragedies to be managed rather than people to be known. Vanessa started asking about Lily, about Russell's life, and Russell, carefully, started asking about Vanessa's life beyond her children, about the company she'd built, about the board who questioned her decisions, about the ex-husband who'd left when the diagnosis became clear. He said he couldn't watch them suffer. Vanessa told Russell one evening in April, after Sebastian had maintained eye contact with her for 30 unbroken seconds. The twins were asleep in their wheelchairs, and Lily was reading in the corner with headphones. As if their existence was suffering, as if being disabled meant being in constant pain rather than just being different. Russell understood the anger. People are terrified of disability because it reminds them how fragile their own bodies are. So they create distance. They make disabled people into others. But your children aren't suffering, Vanessa. They're living. Sometimes living is hard, yes, but that's true for everyone. The difference is they don't get to take the easy moments for granted, which means when it happens, it means more. Vanessa was quiet. Then, I used to pray they'd die. Russell's head snapped toward her. She continued without looking at him. In the early days, when doctors were listing all the things that would be wrong, I'd lie awake and pray God would just take them peacefully, let them slip away so they wouldn't suffer, so I wouldn't have to watch them suffer. What kind of mother prays for her children to die? The kind who loves them, Russell said quietly. The kind who's been told disability is worse than death. You weren't praying for them to die. You were praying to be released from a future you'd been told was hopeless. That's grief, not cruelty. He paused. I prayed for Theo to die, too. Toward the end, when he was having seizures we couldn't control. I prayed for it to be over because I couldn't watch him slip away piece by piece. And then he did die, and I learned there are worse things than watching someone you love struggle, like not having them at all. Do you regret it? Vanessa asked, fighting so hard for him. Do you wish you'd just accepted the prognosis? Russell considered seriously. No, because those 18 months when he was improving, those were the best months of my life after the worst day of my life. If I'd given up, I would have missed seeing him smile again, missed knowing he knew I was still fighting for him. The ending didn't change. He still died. But the middle is where we actually live. Isabel stirred, made a small sound. Russell moved to her immediately, adjusted her position, murmured reassurance. She settled back into sleep. Vanessa watched with an expression Russell was learning to recognize, reassessing everything she thought she knew. You should have been doing this work all along, after everything. You should have channeled that experience into helping families instead of hiding. I wasn't capable of it, Russell said simply. The grief was too fresh. Every child would have been Theo. I had to lose myself completely before I could find a version of myself that could do this work without drowning in what I'd lost. But the universe had other plans. The crisis came on a Wednesday in late April when Russell arrived to find Vanessa standing outside the studio with 2 men in expensive suits and 1 woman he recognized as the company's general counsel. Vanessa's face was pale, her posture rigid. There's been a complaint, she said without preamble. A board member found out about our arrangement, found out you're working with my children, found out about your background, your lack of current credentials. They've issued a directive that I cease bringing the twins to company property and that you're to be terminated immediately. The general counsel stepped forward. Mr. Hayes, you're being paid consultant rates for work you're not licensed to perform. That exposes the company to liability. Additionally, your employment while conducting what amounts to therapy creates insurance and regulatory issues. She handed him a folder. This is your termination package. 2 weeks severance and a release form. This is insane, Vanessa said sharply. Russell isn't providing medical therapy. He's working with my children under my supervision in a private capacity. The general counsel interrupted smoothly. Mrs. Westfield, you're compensating Mr. Hayes through company accounts. That makes it company business. Additionally, 3 board members have expressed concerns about your judgment. There's been talk of a no-confidence vote if this isn't resolved. One of the board members spoke, a man with silver hair and a face suggesting he'd never been told no. Progress toward what, Mr. Hayes? They're still in wheelchairs, still non-verbal, still completely dependent. What exactly has your expensive intervention accomplished besides giving Mrs. Westfield false hope and distracting her from her responsibilities? Russell felt rage rise, but before he could respond, a small voice cut through. They're not nothing! Everyone turned. Lily stood at the end of the hallway, her braces visible, her hands gripping her walking supports, her face fierce. Isabel and Sebastian aren't nothing. They're people, and if you can't see that, then you're the one who's broken, not them. She moved forward with careful steps. When she reached the adults, she looked up at the board member with contempt. I have CP too, and people like you. People who think we're not worth the effort because we can't do things the normal way. People like you are why my dad had to quit being a doctor. Isabel can communicate with her eyes now. Sebastian can tell people what he doesn't want. They're happier than they were before. But you don't care because happy doesn't make you money. The silence was absolute. Russell moved to his daughter, knelt beside her, pulled her into a hug. You didn't have to do that, he murmured. Yes, I did, she whispered back. Because they're my friends, and nobody talks about my friends like they're garbage. Vanessa stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried decision. Gentlemen, Ms. Patterson, Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I'll make this simple. I resign as CEO effective immediately." The board member choked. "Mrs. Westfield, you can't be serious. Over a janitor?" Vanessa's smile was cold. "Over my children. Over my right to make decisions about their care without board interference. Over my refusal to accept that profit matters more than people. Take your pick." She turned to Russell. "I'm rich enough that I don't need this job. I've spent 10 years building this company and I'm proud of what we accomplished. But I'm not proud of a culture where disabled children are seen as distractions. I'll be opening my own practice, something with flexible hours that lets me actually be present for my children. And Russell, if you're interested, I'd like to hire you as my partner. We'll work with families who've been told their children are lost causes. We'll prove that progress looks different for everyone." Russell stared at her, struggling to process what she'd offered. "Vanessa, you can't throw away your career because—" She interrupted. "I'm not throwing it away. I'm redirecting it towards something that matters more. Something that uses everything I learned. How to manage resources, how to navigate bureaucracy, how to fight systems, and applies it to helping families like ours. Families that love their children but don't have the money or knowledge or energy to fight every battle alone." She looked at Russell. "What do you say?" Russell looked at Lily, whose face showed cautious hope. He looked at the studio door where Isabel and Sebastian slept, unaware their lives were being negotiated. He looked at Vanessa, who'd just sacrificed everything for the right to help her children without compromise. "Yes," he said, "but I want to get my license back first. Do it properly this time. No more hiding who I am." The next months were chaos in the best way. Vanessa's resignation made headlines, sparked think pieces about work-life balance, led to 3 board members being forced out when shareholders learned they'd issued an ultimatum between a CEO's disabled children and her job. Russell enrolled in recertification courses, studying at night. Vanessa began building a practice to serve families the system had abandoned. They found accessible office space, hired staff, called the practice Visible, a name Russell suggested that made Vanessa cry when she understood all its layers of meaning. Isabel and Sebastian continued their progress in ways that defied the original prognosis. By Isabel's 5th birthday, she could sit unsupported for 30 seconds, could hold a marker long enough to make purposeful scribbles, could communicate yes and no through reliable eye blinks, and increasingly through small head movements. Sebastian developed clear sounds, an R for attention, a raspberry for displeasure, and a laugh that emerged one afternoon when Lily tripped and made an exaggerated face. That laugh became Vanessa's most treasured sound. The practice grew faster than anticipated. Vanessa's business acumen combined with Russell's clinical expertise created something the community desperately needed, a place where families could bring children who didn't fit conventional categories, where progress was celebrated in all its forms. Within a year, they had a waiting list. Within 18 months, they'd expanded to a 2nd location. Within 2 years, they were training other therapists in their approach. Russell and Vanessa never became romantic partners, though well-meaning people kept suggesting it. Their connection was deeper and stranger than romance. They were people who'd both lost everything and rebuilt, who'd both learned that the conventional path to happiness didn't account for children with disabilities, who'd both discovered professional success meant nothing if it required sacrificing who you loved. They were business partners and co-parents in the sense that Lily, Isabel, and Sebastian had become an inseparable unit. Lily, now 10, had become something extraordinary. She volunteered at the practice after school, serving as a peer mentor for younger kids who needed to see someone like them thriving. She'd started a blog about her life with CP, writing with fierce honesty about hard days and victories and the complicated reality of being disabled in a world built for typical bodies. On a Friday evening in September, 3 years after that first night in the Westfield Tower lobby, Russell stayed late to finish paperwork. He heard the door open, looked up to see Vanessa entering with Isabel and Sebastian in upgraded wheelchairs, and Lily trailing with her homework bag. "I thought you'd gone home?" Russell said. Vanessa shook her head. "Needed files. But also, it's the anniversary." Russell understood immediately. 3 years ago tonight. "Seems like a good night to remember where we started," Vanessa said softly. Lily moved to sit between the wheelchairs, automatically adjusting Isabel's hand and checking Sebastian's headrest. "Tell the story," she said. "About the first night." Russell sat on his desk edge, Vanessa settling opposite. Isabel and Sebastian watched with focused attention. "Once upon a time," Russell began, and Lily rolled her eyes but smiled. "There was a very sad man who'd lost everything and decided the safest thing was to become invisible." "That's you," Lily interjected. "Obviously." Russell grinned. "And there was a very fierce woman who'd built an empire but was being told her children were tragedies instead of miracles. And there were 2 beautiful children who everyone had underestimated. And one night, by accident or fate, the invisible man saw those children and recognized something everyone else had missed. He saw that they were trapped not by their bodies, but by everyone's low expectations." "What did he do?" Lily asked, though she knew. "He knelt down," Russell said softly. "He offered a silly rubber ball, and he waited. He didn't demand, didn't push, didn't try to fix. He just waited to see what those children would choose to show him if given the chance. And one of them, a little girl with eyes like amber, moved her finger for the first time with purpose. And her mother saw it happen. And everything changed." Sebastian made his attention sound. Everyone turned immediately. His eyes moved deliberately to Russell, then to Vanessa, then back. Connection. Recognition that the story was about him and his sister. "Yes," Russell said. "You're in this story too, buddy. You taught us that saying no is as important as saying yes, that boundaries matter, that communication isn't just about words." Isabel blinked twice and added a small head nod. She was agreeing that this story was theirs, that they hadn't been saved but had saved themselves by refusing to disappear into their diagnosis. "The ending is still being written," Vanessa said, her voice thick. "We don't know yet if Isabel will walk independently or if Sebastian will speak full sentences. We don't know if they'll live on their own someday or always need support. But we know they're people. We know they have rich inner lives. We know they love and laugh and get annoyed with each other. We know they matter." "That's not an ending," Lily said. "That's just truth." And she was right. The story didn't need a neat conclusion where challenges were overcome and happy ever after arrived with trumpets. The story was ongoing, messy, complicated by setbacks, and elevated by small victories. The story was Russell sleeping without nightmares most nights now, Theo's memory present, but no longer suffocating. The story was Vanessa discovering that success looked different than she'd imagined. Not corner offices, but afternoons watching her children communicate something only they understood. The story was all of them learning that visibility meant vulnerability, but that being seen was worth the risk. "I should take them home," Vanessa said, standing. "School tomorrow. Well, therapy for these 2. She positioned herself behind Sebastian's wheelchair. "Russell, thank you. I know I say it too much, but thank you for seeing them when everyone else only saw diagnosis." Russell moved to help navigate the wheelchairs through the doorway. "Thank you for letting me see them, for trusting me when you had no reason to, for throwing away your entire career so they could keep progressing." Vanessa paused. "I didn't throw it away. I redirected it. Huge difference. After they left, Russell sat in the quiet office, ostensibly finishing paperwork, but really just existing in the aftermath of memory. 3 years. He pulled open his desk drawer, found the ball still there. Worn now, the rainbow pattern faded from 3 years of being gripped by small hands learning to hold things. He'd bought dozens of replacements, but kept this one. The original, the one that had started everything. His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Dad, Isabel did the coolest thing. She held her head up for like a whole minute while Mrs. Westfield was making dinner. We all cheered, and she got this little smile like she knew she was amazing. Thought you'd want to know." Russell smiled, typed back a response. Before he turned off the lights, he looked around the office. The walls held children's artwork at wheelchair height, paintings done with adapted grips, collages made with eye-gaze technology. There was a framed quote on the wall from a parent. "You didn't teach my son to walk. You taught the world to see him standing." That was it. That was the whole story reduced to its essence. They weren't in the business of fixing children who were already whole. They were in the business of fixing the vision of everyone who looked at disabled children and saw only limitation. They were in the business of making visible what had always been there. Russell locked the office, stepped into the September evening. He walked the 6 blocks to his apartment where the lights were on in his living room window, Lily doing homework, probably listening to music loud enough that he'd have to tell her to turn it down. Normal. So beautifully, impossibly normal after years of chaos and grief. But before he could unlock the door, it swung open and Lily stood there with an expression he couldn't read. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong," Lily said. "But Mrs. Westfield called. Isabel did something else after I texted you. Dad, she said Mama. It wasn't super clear, but everyone heard it, and they all knew what she was saying. She said Mama." Russell felt his eyes burn with tears he didn't try to hide. First words at age 7, years behind typical development charts. Right on time, according to Isabel's own timeline. Perfect. "We should go over there," Russell said. But Lily shook her head. "Mrs. Westfield said to tell you, but stay home tonight. Said it was a private family moment. But Dad? She said to say thank you for believing in impossible things." Russell pulled his daughter into a hug, this miraculous child who'd taught him that life continued after devastating loss, that love expanded when you opened yourself to it, that family was built through choice and commitment. "You want to know a secret?" he murmured. "It was never impossible. Everyone else just stopped looking long enough to see it happen." They went inside, into their small apartment that held everything that mattered. Russell made dinner while Lily did homework. They ate together, talking about her day and his work, and whether Sebastian would develop words too, or find other ways to communicate. It was ordinary in the way that precious things often are, unremarkable to anyone observing from outside, miraculous to those living it. Later, after Lily had gone to bed, Russell stood at her doorway watching her sleep. She'd once asked him, "Why do you look sad when you watch me sleep?" "I'm not sad," he'd told her. "I'm grateful. There's a difference." Someday she'd understand that parenting was controlled terror, punctuated by moments of joy so intense they justified all the fear. Russell moved to his own room, pulled out his phone, scrolled to the photo album he kept private. Theo at age 4, grinning gap-toothed. His wife Eleanor holding their son at the beach, radiant with happiness. The last photo of all 3 of them, 2 weeks before the crash. He didn't look at these photos to torture himself anymore. He looked to remember that love persisted beyond loss, that the people we've lost remain part of us, that grief and gratitude could coexist without contradicting each other. "I think you'd be proud of me," he whispered to Eleanor's image. "I think you'd like Lily. I think Theo would have been a great big brother to her." He closed the album. Tomorrow he'd see Vanessa and hear about Isabel's first word in detail. Tomorrow he'd work with 4 other families, helping children make millimeter progress that would accumulate into transformation. Tomorrow he'd continue the work of making visible what the world wanted to overlook. But tonight, he was just Russell Hayes. Father, friend, former doctor who'd found his way back to healing by first accepting that some wounds never fully close. Sleep came easily. And when morning arrived with Lily's alarm blaring, Russell woke with something he hadn't felt in years: anticipation for the day ahead. Not because anything extraordinary would happen, but because the ordinary had become extraordinary once he'd learned to recognize it. Because invisible children had taught him to see. Because a woman who'd had everything had shown him that sometimes you had to lose it all to find what actually mattered. Because progress was measured in blinks and sounds and millimeter movements. And if you paid attention, if you were patient, if you believed, really believed, that people were exactly who they needed to be even when they didn't match expectations, then impossible things happened every single day. He got up, started coffee, knocked on Lily's door, made breakfast, packed her lunch, helped her with her braces, walked her to the bus stop, his hand on her shoulder, their comfortable silence speaking of security and trust. Watched her board, waving until the bus turned the corner. Then he walked to the practice, arriving early, unlocking the door to a space that smelled like possibility. The red rubber ball sat on his desk where he'd left it. He picked it up, rolled it between his palms, felt its familiar weight. 3 years ago, this ball had been a bridge between impossible and possible. Now it was just a ball, worn, faded, unremarkable. But Russell knew better than anyone that the most powerful things often looked ordinary on the surface. That transformation happened in moments so small they could be missed if you weren't paying attention. That visibility wasn't about being seen by everyone, just by the right people at the right time. He placed the ball back in his drawer, opened his calendar. 6 families today, 12 children, all of them deserving someone who understood that disabled children weren't puzzles to solve, but people to know. All of them needing the message that Isabel and Sebastian and Lily embodied. That different didn't mean less. That progress looked unique for everyone. That love wasn't contingent on achievement or ability. Russell heard the door open, looked up to see Vanessa entering with Isabel and Sebastian, her face glowing with the particular joy of a parent whose child had done something impossible. He stood, moved toward them, ready to hear about Isabel's first word in detail, ready to celebrate a moment 3 years in the making, ready to continue the work of making visible all the children the world had decided weren't worth seeing, ready to prove, one child at a time, that there was no such thing as a lost cause, only people who'd stopped looking long enough to find what was there all along. And in that moment, in that ordinary morning, in an accessible office building 6 blocks from where he lived with his daughter, Russell Hayes was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not invisible, not hiding from his past, not running from grief or drowning in it, just present, just visible, just believing in impossible things until they became possible. Just helping children bloom in their own time, in their own way, at their own perfect pace. That was enough. That was everything. That was the story still being written, one word, one movement, one moment of recognition at a time.